Hi guys, I'm going to get straight into this video and start to talk through how I do a high gloss melamine lacquer finish on my guitars. Melamine is a hard and durable finish. It's also very fast building, very quick to dry and to cure, and you don't need to have a spray setup in order to do it, which is what makes it perfect for home workshops. So this is not a how you should do it video, this is a how I do it video, but I've had quite a few requests from people asking how I do it. So I thought it might be useful to do a video. So I'm going to be using the melamine lacquer to be a grain filler as well. So I haven't applied any grain filler and I haven't applied any sanding sealer, which means that I'm going to apply 6 coats in total, which is probably about double what you would actually need if you did some sealer and grain filler beforehand. So I prepped the body by sanding it to 320 grit, and I'm going to apply the melamine lacquer using a foam brush. I'm going to do 2 coats a day over 3 days for a total of 6. I'm going to leave half an hour between the coats each day. So here I am trying to just put it on as neatly and evenly as I can, although it's quite thick and it dries very fast, so it's not going to be perfect. But the best way I found to do it is to move fairly quickly, because by the time you get to the end of the top, the first part that you've done will already be dry. And it's definitely best not to go back and try and retouch up bits that you've done a couple of minutes beforehand. But on the second and third day before I apply the first coat, what I'm going to do is to very gently sand with 500 grit just to take out all the high spots, not trying to sand it to actually level the finish at this point. But because sometimes it's still quite difficult to understand how much sanding somebody does when they're trying to explain it to you, just left in this whole bit here so you can see exactly the amount of time that I've spent sanding the top of this guitar. So you can skip forwards about 30 seconds or so if you don't want to see that. Okay, so we're on to the subsequent coats here. One of the things that I did find quite useful is that as you put more and more coats on, if you're not thinning the melamine lacquer, you're inevitably going to leave some track marks in the direction that you're brushing. So since I was applying 2 coats a day, what I found quite useful to do is to do the first coat across the grain and do the second coat with the grain, and that kind of has the effect of evening things out a bit. So after all 6 of the coats were on, I left it for a whole week just to cure, because for melamine 90% of the curing happens within 7 days. Now I did all of the sanding with wet and dry paper, so I went from 800 up to 5000 before I started polishing. So this is really what I was talking about when I say no matter how evenly you try and put it on, if you're not thinning it out, it's going to be fairly rough at the point you come to sand it back and polish it. So the light spots that you can see there are where there are dips in the finish. So I suppose in theory what I probably could have done was to go back to 600 grit to quite easily get those out. But what I have found, particularly with the melamine finishing, is that I do struggle to get 600 grit scratches out, whereas if I start with 800 grit, it does in the long run tend to go a bit faster. So what I did for these scratches, before moving up a grit to 1000, I used the 800 to the point where I could still see the scratches, but I couldn't feel them anymore. Because what I have found also is that if you're trying to remove scratches that you can actually feel with 1000 grit, it takes a long time. But if you already get them to the point where you can't feel them any longer, then you're probably ready to move on. So once I've gone all the way up to 5000 grit, I'm ready to move on to the cutting compound. And I use a fine NW1 cutting compound, which I apply with a foam pad on the drill. It's a soft foam pad. I damp the pad first, apply compound to the pad, and then damp the guitar, and give it a rub all over the surface of the guitar before I start polishing. Now the one thing that I really want to avoid here is to heat up the finish. So I do 2 really quick passes with fairly light pressure before I move on to an extra fine polishing compound or a swirl remover. I found that it's really helpful to have some natural light at this point because it's pretty difficult to see any scratches that are left after you do the first pass with a cutting compound. But for this guitar I only needed 2 passes to get rid of all of the sanding scratches. I think the last guitar I did I needed 3 passes to get rid of all the sanding scratches. But this is the stage where it should look perfect afterwards. So an extra fine polish is the last bit that I did, which I just applied by hand, and it's literally just to get rid of any last swells and really gloss up the body. So there you have it. That's how I do my high gloss finishes. So as I said at the start, I don't consider myself to be an expert on it. This is just the best way that I've found to get the results that I'm happy with. So this is the high gloss finish of choice for me from now on. So I've left a few close-up photographs just so that you can see how it looks when it's all finished.